Relationships are scalable. If marketing's job is to build relationships at scale, and if relationships are built through conversation, how can marketing be used to drive conversation? We didn't really define relationships. The channels via which relationships are built have changed, and we're now, technology is allowing us to build relationships at scale on a personal level. Leverage relationships to drive growth in your organization. If you shift the focus to relationships instead of revenue, magic things happen. Relationships are at the core because they help you build affinity and trust. That's how relationships are built. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Relationship-Led Growth Live. Glad to have you all here. Give a couple minutes in case people want to join live. So I get to talk to a lot of executive leaders during my day-to-day, CEOs, CMOs, sales leaders, etc. And in my conversations with CEOs in particular, there tends to be this false belief, I would say, that marketing can only influence revenue. So this all, I think, started a while back, and it, I think, proliferated through the SaaS space first, and has kind of made it over to other industries. But for a while, marketing wasn't really measured that well. You can argue it still isn't, actually. That's something that we'll talk about. But then that led to things like, marketing should be responsible for revenue. Yes, that's awesome. I think there's nothing wrong with that on its own. But like many ideas out there, I think it's been taken a bit out of context and also taken too far. So when you look at things like the predictable revenue model, it's been around for about 10 years or so. You look at a major focus on net new customer and logo acquisition as the primary source of revenue and the primary objective of marketing. What you end up getting, again, is getting to this point where, well, marketing can only impact revenue. And that's simply false, which we'll talk about. But the problem with this belief is that what gets measured gets managed, right? So if we believe that, if the CEO of an organization believes that, and the marketing team then believes that, or is told that, then, well, how do we drive more revenue? Well, we need more leads, right? We need more net new logos, more net new customers. It means we need more leads from net new contacts. Okay, now we're in the lead generation game. That leads to, again, if you look at the audience we generally work with and I generally talk to is technical professional services. So you look at the playbook that most, especially like mid-tier or mid-market consulting orgs and professional services orgs are running. It's your basic gated white papers, gated webinars, and tracking leads all the way through, right? And we know this is a problem across the board in other industries, et cetera. So that's nothing new per se. But for consulting organizations, this is actually an even bigger issue. It exacerbates problems that they already have. So on the one hand, you have most consulting orgs don't actually have a formal business development function. Business development is part of the job of, like a practice lead or a managing director of a particular practice. But a lot of these organizations don't actually have a formal sales team. That's separate. That's the only job. No, this is like, 20 to 30% of a job of a number of people, and that's what they do. So now what you have actually is a major opportunity cost to things like lead qualification, right? So that person who's almost always some of the most highly paid people, highly billable people, they're the ones that are generally responsible for biz dev. So now what you have is this person that could be getting billed at whatever, $450 an hour, sometimes more, sometimes a bit less, but let's use that number. Or they could be spending that same hour qualifying high volume and low quality leads that are coming through from things like gated ebooks. That's just not a realistic thing to do. So that's one thing. I've literally heard from clients early on in our engagements and prospective clients or CEOs that I'm talking to where when I bring up, hey, we need better measurement and tracking of the leads that are coming in and both inbound and outbound, et cetera, I'll often hear some, things like, we don't want to put these directly in our CRM because now that means that our people are going to have to go in there and qualify from there and, manage the pipeline or manage the lead pipeline in that CRM versus just looking at an email and deciding not to follow up with it. Okay, so it adds extra work. So really, you inherently often know that you're driving high volume, low quality, but then it's causing you to go further because now you don't want to put them into the CRM. So now you're not tracking them very well. So you really can't even, you maybe inherently know qualitatively they're not good, but you can't see it quantitatively. So now you're exacerbating the problem even further, and it keeps going and going and going. I've also heard literally CEOs of consulting orgs say things like, well, we'll worry about the CRM and the measurement optimization once we start getting more inbound. So again, it all feeds from the same belief. Well, marketing is only going to impact revenue. The only way that we can get a bunch of net new revenue is by net new logos, or we can increase revenues by net new logos. That means we need to increase our top of funnel. We need more leads. And this whole thing keeps going. Okay. And again, now you're dealing with the opportunity cost of qualification by some of your highest paid and highest billable people. On top of that, actually, here's a good comment. Here we go. Thanks, Matt. You're helping prove my point. Yeah, it takes a lot of time. Takes a lot of time. And again, the more of this transactional type marketing activity that is done, the more low quality, high volume stuff is going to come in, which means, again, people that are not only doing sales, and even if you do have a formal business dev function, there's still an opportunity cost there, right? It's not as high. So add on top of that, what often happens is, I'll talk to these same CEOs, and as we're talking about what they're doing, what's being effective, what's not being effective, what they want to do, etc. I'll ask them, well, historically, where do your business opportunities come from, especially the best ones that you have? Where do your top clients? How did you get them? And nothing is ever 100%, but pretty darn close to 100% of the time, they will say, well, it's all about relationships. It's all about our network. right? It's clients that we have worked with, it's employees, and connections that we have. And this is not just early on we're talking about in, like a consulting org with, maybe 2 or 3 consultants. We're talking about consulting orgs that are in the 10 to $30 million annualized range. They have 100 to 300 people. So these are very mature companies that have been doing this for 10, 20, 30 years. And they take this, what inevitably happens is this focus on top line forces them to end up doing things from a go-to-market perspective, marketing specifically, but it flows down into sales activity as well. Forces them to do things that actually go against how they've traditionally built business, which is a very relationship-centric approach. Okay. So if you think about that and you think about relationships, well, gated white papers and webinars are not going to help you build relationships. And with that, you're generally not doing enough to help build trust and credibility at scale up front, right? Because really, in a consulting type of environment, you're selling people, you're selling your expertise in a particular industry vertical, etc. And there's a big risk to going with, a new consulting partner. Right? There's, the saying of, nobody gets fired for hiring IBM. Generally nobody gets fired for, hiring, Accenture or Deloitte or any of the big four, etc. Right? And when you're fighting that, what you're really trying to do and what you have to do when you go to market is you have to de-risk as much of that decision, the buying decision up front, which means building trust and credibility at scale, right? Most consulting organizations are really good at this one-to-one relationship building. Okay, it's things like events, it's networking in general, asking for referrals and connections from their existing network, things like that, right? And having these one-on-one conversations. That's great. But the problem you start running into is, again, especially because it's within a consulting environment, it's even harder to break through because unless you're going to bring on a fully, independent sales team, you have biz dev sales being done by, as we were talking about, managing directors and practice leads. Okay. So each of those people can only manage so many relationships and so many conversations and so many deals at a given time, because again, this is not their full-time job. They're not only selling, they're also doing work, they're managing people, they're, overseeing projects, etc. Okay. So, but you can't just go and bring on another practice lead, right? Unless you have the work to justify that, or unless you have a new practice or whatever. So you can't simply just, as in like SaaS companies, well, yeah, sure, you can just go hire another salesperson, another AE or another SDR, whatever. You don't have that same type of system in professional services, usually. Especially not in these like high ticket, management consulting and digital transformation, whatever type environments. You may have maybe 1 or 2 dedicated salespeople, especially like they'll often have folks dedicated to enterprise sales, maybe. But that's it. Still not enough, where you can't just keep bringing those people on. So there's a limit to how many one-to-one relationships, conversations you can have. And what happens is once you get to a certain revenue threshold, and usually it's right around somewhere between 20 and 30 million, the only thing you're doing usually is replacing natural churn within your business because of that limiting factor. So what generally happens is, again, there's this focus on top line. You want to break through that ceiling. Great. Let's do more top funnel. We already talked about what happens there. And this is where you end up with this disconnect between how you want to sell and how you've built relationships in the past and how you are now marketing and overarching going to market, especially top funnel. And now you've got this disconnect and you're almost fighting yourself. Okay. So the other thing that happens along with this, by the way, is as you start doing more of this transactional activity, it inevitably leads to more transactional type business. So, meaning instead of getting in front of your target ICP, so whatever it might be, CEOs, CISOs, CTOs, whatever, whoever your ICP is, senior leaders, you're getting in front of project leaders, manager level folks, maybe director level folks at these organizations. And you're getting more project-based work because of the transactional type of activity, right? So these people, especially in an enterprise setting, they probably have they can put 30 grand on a credit card and just sign off on a deal. But you're not looking for 30 grand deals. You're probably looking for 100,000, $250,000, $500,000, $2 million deals, right? With what types of customers you're looking for. So now you are in this kind of perpetual motion of lower quality, oftentimes lower margin as well, because you're lower down the kind of the strategic totem pole, if you will. And again, you're starting to create a completely different type of inbound motion than what you were used to, than what your revenue and staffing model is built around. And that creates all sorts of other problems down the line. Okay. And again, this all, if you pull on that string all the way back to the root cause, if you will, it's this very heavy top line revenue growth focus. And the belief from there that marketing can only impact revenue and that margins are, impacted elsewhere, things like that. So the solution to this isn't necessarily to say that, well, you shouldn't measure revenue. No, that's not it at all. You have to measure revenue. It's a core financial metric for business health. You have to do that. Also if you're looking to get acquired at some point, you need to show revenue growth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. But the problem that happens is we start managing to revenue when revenue is actually an outcome. Right? What's an outcome of? It's an outcome of relationships, great relationships. And that's why when I ask CEOs, where do business opportunities come from? They inevitably say relationships. Okay, so if we know that relationships are the driver of revenue, let's focus our go-to-market there. Okay, so there are two critical questions to ask if we focus on relationships. Number one is, what influences and helps build relationships? And then number two, how do you extract value? How do you extract revenue in particular from these relationships? Now, I use the word extract both purposefully, and I want everybody to be careful about that, because I think we can all in our heads come up with a relationship, either personal or business or professional, that we've had where the person on the other hand was only extracting, was only taking. That relationship generally doesn't go very far, right? So yes, we need to extract value from the relationships we build, because otherwise we don't have a business. But we have to be careful to do it in a way that's mutually beneficial, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So If we look at those two things, what influences and builds relationships, and how do you extract value from those relationships? It leads us into what a successful go-to-market approach for technical professional services and consulting orgs can look like. All right. And again, it's not just that top line focus. So it's not just about lead volume at that point. It's about understanding your ecosystem and building up your relationship volume within that ecosystem. So the more relationships you have within that ecosystem, the more targeted relationships you have within that ecosystem, the more revenue you can drive long term. And not only just revenue, generally, the more profitable you're going to be, better cash flow you have, et cetera, et cetera. So what does that look like? The issue that, again, happens is during this transition from, okay, we need to move from strictly one-to-one relationship building to one-to-many relationship building. The word relationship kind of gets forgotten and we start filling the funnel. Okay, words matter. And once we switch our mindset from the relationship at the center to it's now a funnel, now you're doing transactional activities and it's everything that we've already talked about. Okay, so again, it's not about ignoring revenue measurement. We have to measure revenue. But instead, we need to focus on the sources of revenue and profitability. Focus on those relationships. Okay, so bringing back to those two core questions, right? What influences relationships? What helps you build them? First is affinity. Okay, we need to build trust and credibility at scale so that we can start conversations with our target accounts, target ICP. Okay, now let's define conversations because, again, definitions and words are important. So that could be a LinkedIn chat that happens, inbound or outbound. That could be a chat in a webinar that you're hosting. This could be an email, again, inbound or outbound that you send. This could be a comment on a social post that you put out there, that your company put out there. This could be a conversation at an event. This could be a phone call, etc. So when we talk about measurement, we have to look at all the various sources. Oftentimes, this is another place where things kind of fall apart, is organizations are only measuring things that are easy. So things like form submits on the website. Okay, those are obvious. Great. We can start a conversation from there. But that's not the only source. Again, your people, especially again in a consulting environment, your individual, managing directors, et cetera, practice leads, et cetera, they're going to events, they're having conversations, they're maybe posting content on LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. But none of that usually gets into the CRM. So then we have no idea how to optimize against it, so we don't. And then again, we go and start optimizing towards the things that are lower value, but yet easier to measure. And again, we end up back in where we started here. So what you want to measure there is engagement. Okay, so if you're posting content or your company's posting content on social like LinkedIn, et cetera, you want to measure engagement on that content. You want to measure things like brand traffic because that's a marker of, hey, am I building affinity? Am I building trust and credibility in the market that's causing people to come and search for me directly or for my company directly? From there, it's like traffic to high intent pages are important. If you've got a podcast or a newsletter, subscribers, right? So are you building that? And then obviously from there, it's engagement rate on those assets. Listeners, if you have a podcast, things like that. And again, it's going to differ based on what assets you have at your disposal, what you're doing from an activation perspective. So I'm not going to list every single thing here. And then for conversations, you want to measure both inbound and outbound, like I was mentioning. So forms, yes, but then chat, email, calls, and then measure response rates on the outbound side. So if you have people, you know, your managing directors are reaching out to folks proactively, whether that's through a referral that comes in or just, we'll call it cold or coldish, you want to be measuring that. Are the response rates improving? Because the idea here is if you're building affinity at scale with your marketing efforts, whatever those may be, whether that's events, podcasts, webinars, research studies, whatever, right? Tactically, doesn't matter. If you're building that affinity at scale, you're building that trust and credibility at scale, your outbound should be more successful. You should have more people responding and responding faster and responding more favorably, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So measuring those things. Again, those are harder to measure and they require you to update, your sales process and data management practices internally and CRM, your CRM setup, et cetera, which we'll talk about in a minute, actually. Okay. So then the other question is, well, how do you extract revenue from those relationships? Right. So conversations, every relationship is built on conversations. It starts from a conversation, right? So how do you take that and build toward a business conversation? Because at the end of the day, we have to be able to extract value at some point. Okay. Now, this doesn't mean that every single conversation that you're having or every single person you're talking to is a prospective buyer. Okay, think about the ecosystem. So it could be influencers and KOLs, right? Key opinion leaders. It could be partners. So in the like digital transformation space, IT, cybersecurity space, on the consulting side, you're almost guaranteed to have technology partners. Great. How do you activate those relationships so that you can get more referrals, et cetera? Right. But you can build to a favorable business conversation there. And then on the relationship side, then how do you turn those business conversations into actual business relationships where there is value being exchanged? Okay. Now, again, that value could be with a potential customer. It could be value that you provide to a partner or to an influencer that gets access to your audience. Whatever. The value is a broad term at this point, but it's important to think of it that way. It's not strictly direct revenue, but at some point, you're looking for revenue impact and you're looking for margin and profitability impact and cash flow impact, et cetera. Okay. So what you want to measure there are what's your opportunity rate? Meaning, okay, you've had these early stage conversations. How many of them turn into an actual business opportunity? How many of them turn into an actual business conversation? You want to obviously measure your ACVs, average contract values, margin, extremely important on the professional services side, retention rates, LTV from there. But then the other one that's almost always missed is what I'll call referral inclusive LTV. So meaning not just the value you're getting, the revenue you're getting directly from this a customer or client, but also the referral revenue that they're driving for you. Okay, so maybe you have a actual customer referral program, right? That's pretty straightforward. But even if you don't, you can enable referrals in a variety of ways. So looking at it that way becomes really, really important because then you start really looking at where is the real, like, where's the real value? Where is there an asymmetrical kind of opportunity to be had? So if as an example, all things being equal, in terms of the type of business and the quality of the opportunity, if you have a client that's, you're making $250,000 a year in your contract value, but they never refer anybody, versus a client who is maybe $150,000 a year, but gives you, two referrals a year, of which you close one on average of, another, let's say $200,000 a year. Which one would you rather have? As long as the business that's coming through referrals is quality. Well, I'd rather have the one that refers business to me. Okay. So understanding that becomes really, really important, because also oftentimes the clients that we bring on, they will refer other clients similar to them that have similar problems, that have similar, criteria to deciding who they work with, all this kind of stuff. So going all the way back, if you are doing transactional type marketing that's driving more transactional project-based work, those people are going to refer more people that are like that, which you don't necessarily want comparatively. And now you have more and more of that work, right? It's a flywheel, but it's not a very good one, actually. So understanding where are your high margin pockets of business, where are your high referral volume pockets of business, and then scaling there, making more investment there from a go-to-market perspective. And then that allows you then to start saying maybe no to some more of these, worse fit clients, allows you to start changing your, kind of lead focused, top funnel focused strategy and shifting away from that over time. So again, you can do this as long as you're tracking the right things in your CRM, as long as you're measuring these pieces, right? Not just your CRM for that matter, but again, measuring where the higher margin clients coming from. Are they in a particular industry? Are they in a particular geography? Are they buying a particular service from you? Are they coming from a particular referral source? All of those things you should be able to figure out. And once you do, now that allows you to build a plan on how to scale that. So as an example, let's say you find that let's say you have 4 verticals that you are targeting. I'll make this up completely. Let's say it's aerospace, technology, life sciences, and higher ed. Totally making this up. And you find that in the aerospace market, your margins are 50%, and in the other ones, your margins are 35%. Okay. How do you get more aerospace business? Now you start looking, again, you go upstream. Who are the clients there? Do you have testimonials from them? Do you have customer stories from them? Right. So now we can get tactical. Why do, even before you go there, why do they have higher margins? Do we understand that? Is it simply because they have higher budgets? Is it because they're buying a particular set of services from us that happen to be higher margin services? Or are we, because of the type of work, we're able to, again, kind of going along with that, are we able to staff it with, maybe more junior people and still deliver the high quality work that's needed, whatever it may be? Okay. Now you can take that and try to scale it, as I was talking about. You can look at, do you have the testimonials and the customer stories? Are you putting out, research, industry research for those people that they would be interested in? Do you have? Can you ask for referrals from some of these best customers? Can you? Who are the industry influencers in the aerospace sector that you maybe need to invite onto and co-host a webinar with, or invite onto your podcast, or co-market a research study with? All these pieces only make sense once you've found that higher margin pocket. Same thing with referral pockets of your business. Like, are you getting more referrals from client referrals from from the life sciences segment? Okay. Why is that? Do we know why? Is it better relationships? Is it a personal connection with the CEO? Again, it could be a million different reasons for it. But once you can understand that and understand what drives the relationship aspect, you can actually build a go-to-market around it, right? So, and on the flip side, once you find those pockets, you can focus more of your budget and efforts on that. But then the flip side of that, when you find the pockets that don't work as well, maybe you can fix it. The question is why, right? Maybe you can fix the marketing and the pre-sales for those other 3 industries, let's just say, that we were talking about. Maybe there's an issue there. Now, there might not be, and it might simply be the industry itself. Okay. And then you have to decide, is that still worthwhile to, keep, or do you want to completely shift into different industries, et cetera? So now this turns into more of a business discussion than just a marketing discussion. The last part here that's important too is when we think about, again, this trend of, well, marketing needs to be responsible for revenue. Yes, awesome, great, fine with that. But now that leads to, well, marketing can only impact revenue. Now we get into, from a growth perspective for a consulting organization, as much as 70% of your revenue growth year over year doesn't mean a 70% increase. 70% of whatever increase you have, whether that be 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever, is likely coming from and should be coming from existing client expansion. Okay. And this is another thing that generally tends to get ignored because of this belief that, oh, well, we just need to fill in top of funnel and focus on that, et cetera. We ignore what in, other industries would be called customer marketing, right? So we really focus the expansion side of things strictly on sales and biz dev, and not as much on marketing side of things. And that's a problem, right? Because again, if your goal is to grow 20% year over year next year, and as much as 13% of that, 13% of the 20% is supposed to come from expansion from existing clients. The higher you are on the revenue side of things, the harder it becomes, again, to do that even with your strictly with that one-to-one relationship building approach. So I talked to a lot of people, I've done a lot of customer interviews, and I can't tell you the number of times I'll be talking to a client of a client, and they will end up telling me that they don't know the full extent of the capabilities of the partner they're working with. How can you possibly maximize expansion opportunities if that's the case? You're leaving so much money on the table, it's not even funny. But because all of your marketing efforts are focused on net new, you're missing out on these opportunities, which are oftentimes much easier. right? So there are two ways to do it. One is the existing contact within an enterprise account usually doesn't realize you have another capability that they also have a need for, so they go somewhere else. Or other departments have no idea you exist. And combine that with the fact that your contact within whatever department you're working with doesn't know your full capability. Now you're missing out on even more, because not only are they maybe not telling their counterparts in general about you, but they also don't have a reason to talk about you if the capability that is needed in the other departments isn't the exact same one that they're already working with you on. Now, combine that with the conversation we just had about margins, and now you can start seeing why we often have these pockets of high margin and pockets of low margin, because we're not doing enough to expand our business in the high margin side of things. So let's say you're working with a client, high margin client, great relationship, but they don't know your full capabilities, and you haven't made any inroads with any of their counterparts in other lines of business. Well, now you can't take that high margin account and expand it enough. And you're potentially going to replace that high margin revenue with lower margin revenue elsewhere, because it's based on your current go to market with, and kind of the lead gen type approach. That's what you're going to get. So I've another story I'll tell you. I was talking to a CEO a month or so ago, maybe 2 months ago, and sorry, take that back. This one was not the CEO. I was talking to I was talking to their sales leader, and the conversation started going toward their go to market and all this kind of stuff, and they're in the IT cybersecurity space, and I asked them what their margins were, and right away, based on their answer, I could tell that's a problem. Your margins are too low. So that also then again perpetuates. If your margins are low, you don't have as much free cash flow, et cetera. So you try to increase that, and you go more top funnel, right? So it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in a negative flywheel, if you will, that gets created. And I asked them, hey, have you done a win-loss analysis? If you looked at your CRM data to see whether you have these pockets of better margins? They said no. You have the data. I almost guarantee you that you have the data. It might not all be in your CRM, let's just say, but you have the data. You can pull it together. Right? You can pull. You've got your billing system. You have it somewhere. So, and again, I have these same conversations over and over and over again. So from there, once you've established all these pieces, right, it's then you start figuring out who are the people that I need to build these relationships with in this ecosystem. Again, who are the influencers and key opinion leaders? Who are the partners I need to build relationships with? Formally or informally. Who are the clients that I want to go after? Who are my target accounts that match the types of accounts that already have high margins, high referral rates, etc. Okay, once you've built that, you've identified that, you can build your ideal ecosystem, if you will. Then you figure out, okay, what assets do I need to build affinity with these people and start conversations with these people, and then nurture those relationships as they get built. And then you can start connecting the dots. So again, I know we started in a very different spot, but again, I firmly believe and see this through line from too much focus on top line revenue causes all these things and creates these negative flywheels that, as a service-based business, you don't want for a variety of reasons. Okay, because it makes it harder to sell the business later. It makes it harder to manage as it grows. Makes it even more unpredictable, actually, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, the point here is not to say, well, don't measure revenue. You have to. 100% you have to. But remember that revenue is an outcome of relationships. So make sure that you're managing toward building relationships. The revenue will come. And as you identify where you believe the revenue will come from, so as you identify how you extract value from these relationships and which relationships they are, now you have a hypothesis. So if your revenue isn't growing high enough, now you've got something to go back to and say, well, why isn't it? Where was I wrong in my relationship hypothesis? And you can change that. Oh, well, we thought that aerospace is where it's at, but it looks like that might have been an anomaly. The new business that's been driven in the aerospace sector actually is lower margin, so that's not the case. Okay, now you can adjust. But without identifying in the first place and being able to make that hypothesis and then testing it, you really have nowhere to go. And then the only thing you can do is do the traditional, let's build the top funnel, high lead volume, transactional type of approach. All the while, the people who are doing sales are continuing on with a very relationship-focused type approach. And you have two very different types of models at that point that just can't be supported. So again, just about everything I talk about comes back to focusing on relationships, relationship-focused selling, marketing, etc. And that is where we are at. As I'm wrapping up here, want to make a couple of announcements for folks that are here live and anybody who is listening after the fact. We get a bunch of people that usually listen afterwards. Two things. One, I am actually launching, or Proofpoint and me as the host are launching a new podcast. The show is called The Relationship Mindset. And I am looking to interview business owners, executives, and talk to them about a business building relationship story. So really want to focus on, again, some of the same aspect that we just talked about. What is a relationship that you have built that has made an impact on your business? This could be a mentor, this could be a partnership, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's one. The other thing is I've actually been doing a little bit of client work recently because just had that itch to go and do that. It's great for me to, as a CEO, to also really get firsthand experience with our target audience. So that engagement's going to be wrapping up in February timeframe, and I actually want to keep going with that. So if you are a consulting org CEO or executive, CMO, etc., or if you know of one that could benefit from working with me directly, please let me know. So I'm looking to take on just one of these engagements roughly every 6 months or so, at least as of right now. So I should have an opening again sometime in February. So if you know anybody, or if you are that somebody, just reach out directly. Happy to have a conversation. With that, thank you all for joining Relationship-Led Growth Live, and we'll see you all in a couple weeks.